Tens of thousands of years ago, the Earth was locked in the grip of the Pleistocene epoch. Colossal ice sheets, miles thick, reached down from the poles, swallowing the northern reaches of the continents. As these gargantuan glaciers grew, they siphoned water from the oceans, causing sea levels to plummet by hundreds of feet. In the frigid silence of this era, a secret passage began to emerge between the edges of Siberia and the unknown expanse of Alaska. This was not a narrow crossing, but a vast, subcontinental bridge of tundra, destined to become the stage for one of history's greatest migrations. The region known as Beringia was far from a barren wasteland of ice. Instead, it was a thriving ecosystem called the Mammoth Steppe, a wind-swept grassland that remained remarkably free of glaciers due to low snowfall. Here, the air was crisp and biting, carrying the scent of hardy shrubs and Arctic grasses. The lowering tides revealed a landscape that stretched for over 1,000 miles from north to south. This newly exposed land provided a vital corridor for flora and fauna to exchange between the old and new worlds, unknowingly laying the path for the first human footsteps into the Americas. Following the rhythm of the seasons and the movement of their prey, small bands of nomadic hunters began to drift eastward. These people were master survivalists, adapted to the harshest conditions known to humanity. They did not see themselves as explorers discovering a new world, but as families seeking stability in an ever-shifting environment. They carried with them a profound understanding of the natural world, tracking the herds of megafauna that sustained their lives. Each step they took across the grassy land bridge was a testament to human resilience and the relentless drive to persevere against the elements. Among the giants that roamed this land bridge, the woolly mammoth was king. These massive creatures, clad in thick, shaggy hair, moved in slow, methodical herds across the steppe. For the early humans, the mammoth was a walking resource, a source of meat, bone for tools, and skin for shelter. Hunting such a beast required incredible coordination, bravery, and sophisticated strategy. The relationship between the hunters and the mammoth was one of profound respect and necessity, as the survival of the tribe often hinged on the success of a single dangerous encounter with these prehistoric titans. Survival in Beringia required more than just hunting. It demanded a mastery of craftsmanship. These early pioneers developed specialized toolkits, utilizing obsidian and flint to create razor-sharp scrapers and projectile points. In the absence of abundant wood, they learned to use bone and ivory for needles and structural supports. Every scrap of hide was meticulously sewn into windproof clothing using sinew. This technological ingenuity was the key to their expansion. They were not merely wandering. They were establishing a complex culture that thrived in a landscape where few others could endure, turning the bridge into a home. As the generations passed, the migration was not a singular event, but a slow, gradual drift. The people moved as the climate dictated, following the ebb and flow of animal populations like the steppe bison and the caribou. These herds were the lifeblood of the Beringian corridor, their massive numbers carving paths through the tall grasses. The hunters observed the behavior of these animals with scientific precision, learning the best times to cross rivers and where to find shelter from the fierce Arctic gales. This deep connection to the wildlife ensured their steady progress across the land bridge. The environment of the land bridge was a place of extreme contrasts. While the summers brought a brief, intense burst of life and perpetual daylight, the winters were long, dark, and unforgiving. Fierce winds, unobstructed by forests, whipped across the plains, dropping temperatures to levels that could freeze breath instantly. Fire was the sacred center of their camps, provided by the scarce fuel of dwarf willow and dried dung. Around these flickering flames, stories were told and knowledge was passed down, keeping the spirit of the community alive even in the deepest, coldest nights of the Ice Age. Contrary to the image of a narrow path, Beringia was a world unto itself, spanning hundreds of miles of diverse terrain. It featured its own mountain ranges, river systems, and coastal marshes. This was a central point of the world, a junction where different lineages of plants and animals met and mingled. For the humans living here, the land bridge wasn't a transition. It was their entire world. They settled in the more temperate regions of the interior, creating semi-permanent camps that would be occupied for decades before the pressure of resources or climate pushed them further east. The social structure of these early Americans was built on cooperation and kinship. Tribes were likely composed of extended family groups, where the wisdom of the elders was as vital as the strength of the young. Raising children in such a demanding environment required a village-wide effort, where every member had a role to play. They developed complex languages to convey intricate details about the land and its dangers. This social cohesion was their greatest weapon against extinction, allowing them to adapt to new challenges as they slowly approached the eastern edge of the Beringian continent. Finally, the edge of the known world appeared on the horizon. After centuries of gradual movement, the hunters reached the foothills of what we now call the Yukon and Alaska. To the west lay the vast plains of Beringia they had called home for generations. But to the east rose the formidable barrier of the Canadian ice sheets. They had reached the gateway to a new world, a continent that had remained untouched by human presence for millions of years. This moment marked the end of their journey through the bridge and the beginning of a new chapter in human history. Standing at the edge of the Yukon, the pioneers encountered a wall of white that seemed to touch the heavens. The Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets, two massive glaciers miles high, merged to form an impenetrable blockade across the continent. This frozen fortress held the world's water, locking the land in a silent, crystalline grip. For centuries, these ice sheets dictated the movement of all life, acting as both a barrier and a guardian of the lands beyond. To the early travelers, the ice was a living entity, groaning and shifting under its own immense weight, challenging their resolve to move further south. As the millennia passed, the global climate began a slow, fitful dance of warming. The relentless grip of the last glacial maximum started to loosen, causing the great ice sheets to weep massive rivers of meltwater. Deep fissures appeared in the white expanse, and the roar of calving ice echoed through the valleys. This transition was not swift, but it was inevitable. The shifting environment created a chaotic landscape of mud, slush, and temporary lakes, signaling a change in the Earth's geography that would eventually carve a path through the frozen wasteland for those brave enough to follow the receding frost. While the interior remained a frozen puzzle, some groups turned their gaze toward the Pacific horizon. The Kelp Highway hypothesis suggests that the first Americans may have bypassed the ice by hugging the rugged coastline. This maritime route offered a different set of rewards, a bounty of sea urchins, fish, and marine mammals sustained by the nutrient-rich kelp forests swaying beneath the waves. The ocean was a volatile but generous provider, offering a liquid path southward that remained open even when the land was choked by glaciers. This coastal migration required a shift in perspective, viewing the sea not as a void, but as a bridge. Survival on the coast demanded incredible ingenuity, and the birth of maritime technology. Using the bones of large mammals and the skins of seals or sea lions, these early explorers crafted resilient, flexible watercraft. These boats were engineering marvels of the ancient world, capable of navigating the treacherous, ice-choked waters of the North Pacific. Each vessel was a testament to their adaptability, allowing family groups to transport supplies and children across bays and around protruding glaciers. This technological leap transformed the shoreline into a highway, moving the human story forward one cove at a time, away from the biting winds of the north. Life along the coastal fringe was a rhythmic cycle of harvesting and movement. In the intertidal zones, women and children gathered shellfish, while hunters targeted seals resting on ice floes. The abundance of the Pacific provided a reliable caloric intake that the harsh interior often lacked. Every tide brought new resources, and the relative stability of the coastal climate allowed for more frequent stops. These temporary camps, nestled in protected coves, served as the staging grounds for the next leg of their journey. They were learning the language of the tides, a knowledge base that would be passed down through countless generations. Back in the interior, the Great Thaw finally breached the ice. A narrow corridor, stretching between the two receding glaciers, began to emerge. This was the ice-free corridor, a raw, scarred landscape of gravel, silt, and pioneering vegetation. It was a desolate environment at first, filled with the roar of wind and the constant grind of distant ice. However, hardy grasses and shrubs soon took root in the glacial till, attracting grazing animals. For the human groups waiting at the northern gate, this corridor represented a perilous but direct umbilical cord into the heart of a vast, unknown continent. Venturing into the corridor was a journey into a literal no-man's land. The air was thin and biting, and the threat of flash floods from bursting glacial lakes was ever present. These travelers were the first humans to ever set foot in these valleys, walking on ground that had been buried under miles of ice for 30,000 years. Every step south was a step into a vacuum of history. They followed the tracks of mammoths and bison, who were also exploring this new opening, their lives entwined with the beasts they hunted. The corridor was a test of endurance, a gauntlet of stone and ice. Emerging from the southern end of the corridor, the environment underwent a dramatic transformation. The oppressive walls of ice fell away, replaced by the staggering expanse of the Great Plains. Here, the explorers encountered a fauna of nightmarish proportions. The short-faced bear, a predator taller than a man even on all fours, and the giant ground sloth roamed these virgin lands. The sheer scale of the territory was overwhelming. It was a world of endless grass and sky, offering limitless opportunities, but presenting terrifying new predators that had never before seen a human hunter. The rules of survival were being rewritten in real time. Navigation in this new world required a mastery of the heavens. Without the familiar landmarks of Beringia, the travelers turned to the stars to chart their course. The night sky over ancient America was a brilliant, unfiltered map where constellations told stories of the past and provided directions for the future. They tracked the movements of the sun and moon, aligning their migrations with the changing seasons. This celestial knowledge was essential for maintaining a sense of direction in the featureless plains. The stars became their silent companions, guiding them through the darkness of the unknown as they carved out a new existence in the south. As the population grew, the first Americans began to diverge, following different paths across the continent. Some turned east toward the Great Lakes and the Atlantic, while others continued their southward push toward the tropics and beyond. This was the beginning of a great radiation of culture and language. They were no longer just survivors of a bridge. They were the architects of a new world. Each group adapted their tools, clothing, and social structures to the unique demands of their chosen environments. The journey that began in the freezing winds of Siberia had now blossomed into the settlement of an entire hemisphere. As groups veered eastward, the open plains gave way to the dense, towering canopies of the Appalachian forests. The light here was dappled and shifting, filtered through ancient oak and hickory. This new environment demanded a total shift in survival strategy. The vast, easily tracked herds of the plains were replaced by more solitary, elusive prey like the white-tailed deer. The damp, shaded earth provided a wealth of new flora, mosses, ferns, and medicinal roots that required generations of careful study. These pioneers became masters of the wood, learning to navigate the labyrinthine hills and hidden valleys of a verdant, shadowed world. The great river systems of the interior became the lifeblood of the eastern migrations. Along the banks of the Ohio and Mississippi, the first Americans discovered an abundance of freshwater resources previously unknown to them. They developed sophisticated techniques for harvesting fish and mussels, utilizing the seasonal pulses of the waterways. The rivers served as natural highways, facilitating communication and the exchange of rare materials like high-quality chert and obsidian across vast distances. Life revolved around the water's edge, where the silt was rich and the reeds provided material for weaving, marking a transition toward more sedentary, seasonal fishing camps. Further west and south, the landscape began to bake under an unforgiving sun. The lush greenery of the north faded into the rugged canyons and vast scrublands of the southwest. Here, the challenge was no longer the bone-chilling cold, but the desperate scarcity of water. The travelers adapted by tracking the movements of desert animals and observing the locations of hidden springs. They sought shelter in the deep shadows of sandstone alcoves, which provided natural protection from the midday heat. This harsh terrain forged a resilient culture, one that understood the delicate balance of life in a high-desert ecosystem where every drop of moisture was sacred. As the climate continued to shift toward the end of the Pleistocene, the first Americans witnessed the slow decline of the megafauna that had once dominated the continent. The massive Columbian mammoths and mastodons were becoming increasingly rare sights as their habitats shrunk. The hunters had to become more versatile, diversifying their diet to include smaller game and a wider array of seasonal plant life. This ecological transition was a major turning point, forcing a greater emphasis on gathering and the preservation of food. The relationship between the humans and the land evolved from one of pure predation to a more complex, observant stewardship of dwindling resources. Innovation became the hallmark of this era as the population expanded. The development of the Clovis point, a sophisticated fluted spearhead, represented a pinnacle of stone tool technology. These points were not just weapons. They were marvels of engineering, designed for maximum penetration and durability during the hunt. Each stone was meticulously knapped, reflecting a deep understanding of lithic materials and physics. This shared technology spread rapidly across the continent, suggesting a vast network of interaction and cultural exchange. These tools allowed the pioneers to thrive in diverse habitats, from the frozen tundra to the humid forests, unifying disparate groups through a common, expert craftsmanship. Pushing even further south, the environment shifted again into the humid, subtropical reaches of the Gulf Coast. Here, the air was heavy with moisture, and the land was a mosaic of bayous, swamps, and dense pine forests. The abundance of life was staggering, from migratory birds to reptiles that lurked in the dark waters. The settlers here adapted to a semi-aquatic lifestyle, learning to navigate the marshes and utilize the rich diversity of the wetlands. Their shelters became more elevated to avoid the damp earth, and their diet was supplemented by the endless bounty of the coastal estuaries, creating a specialized way of life. By this stage, the descendants of the Beringia crossing were no longer a single monolithic people. Thousands of miles and generations of separation had led to the emergence of distinct languages, customs, and traditions. Each group developed its own unique lore, tying their identity to the specific geography they inhabited. From the mountain dwellers of the Rockies to the coastal peoples of the Pacific, the continent was becoming a complex tapestry of human experience. This was the birth of American diversity, a slow-motion explosion of culture that transformed the vast, empty landscapes into a collection of deeply rooted and spiritually significant homelands. Survival was a perpetual cycle of movement, governed by the calendar of the natural world. The first Americans became expert phenologists, knowing exactly when the salmon would run, when the berries would ripen, and when the herds would migrate through the mountain passes. Their lives were synchronized with the heartbeat of the earth. They developed methods to store food for the lean winter months, such as drying meat and caching nuts in stone pits. This foresight was the difference between life and death. The ability to plan for the future, based on a profound knowledge of the past, allowed these societies to stabilize and grow. As the generations marched onward, the narrow isthmus of Panama beckoned. This land bridge between the two great American landmasses was a bottleneck of biodiversity and a new challenge for the explorers. The dense jungles of Central America presented a barrier of extreme heat, humidity, and unknown pathogens. To pass through, the travelers had to adapt once again, trading their heavy northern furs for lighter garments and developing new ways to find food in the thick, multi-layered rainforest. This crossing marked the final stage of the initial continental expansion, opening the door to the vast, unexplored reaches of the South American continent. Within a few millennia, the descendants of those first few hundred hunters from Beringia had reached the southernmost tip of the world. From the Arctic Circle to Tierra del Fuego, the Americas were now human territory. The journey was complete, but the story was just beginning. These people had not just discovered a continent, they had reimagined it, filling its silence with song, its plains with history, and its mountains with memory. They were the first Americans, and they had successfully claimed an entire hemisphere, forever altering the course of human history through their endurance, ingenuity, and spirit of exploration. As the sprawling geography of the two continents isolated various groups, a profound cultural divergence began to take root. Languages, once shared across small hunting bands, fractured and evolved into hundreds of distinct linguistic families. This was not merely a change in speech, but a transformation of worldview. Each unique dialect captured the essence of its specific environment, naming plants, animals, and weather patterns that existed nowhere else. In the silence of the canyons and the rustle of the northern pines, the foundations of diverse nations were being laid through the power of the spoken word and oral tradition. In the shadow of the towering Andes, a new way of life emerged among the peaks. To survive at such dizzying heights, these pioneers developed a deep understanding of high-altitude ecosystems. They domesticated the resilient llama and alpaca, animals that provided both wool for warmth and a means of transporting goods across treacherous slopes. The thin air and rocky soil necessitated a radical shift in subsistence. Here, they began to experiment with the wild tubers that would one day become the potato, learning to freeze-dry them in the cold mountain nights to ensure survival through the harshest seasons. East of the mountains, the emerald canopy of the Amazon basin offered a labyrinthine world of water and wood. The inhabitants of this region became master navigators, carving sleek canoes from massive trunks to traverse the complex network of rivers. The forest was not a barrier, but a source of abundance for those who knew its secrets. They practiced agroforestry, subtly altering the landscape by planting fruit-bearing trees and enriching the soil to create terra preta, or dark earth. This sophisticated land management allowed for dense settlements in a region once thought to be inhospitable to large populations. On the vast expanses of the Great Plains, the relationship between humans and the land was defined by the horizon. As the giant megafauna of the Ice Age faded into memory, the bison became the center of the universe for the nomadic peoples of the grasslands. These hunters developed intricate strategies to guide massive herds, utilizing the natural terrain to their advantage. Every part of the animal was used: hides for shelters, bones for tools, and meat for sustenance. The rhythm of the plains was a dance of movement, following the great herds as they migrated with the changing seasons across the grassy sea. In the arid regions of the Great Basin and the Southwest, water was more precious than gold. The people here became experts in desert hydrology and the art of weaving. Using the fibers of yucca and willow, they created intricate baskets so tightly woven they could hold water. Their survival depended on a meticulous calendar of desert blooms and seed harvests. They lived in harmony with the heat, building shelters into the cooling shade of canyon walls. This mastery of one of the Earth's most demanding environments showcased the incredible versatility and resilience of the early American spirit as they turned barren rock into home. The transition from wandering hunters to settled farmers began in the fertile river valleys of the East and the highlands of Mexico. The discovery of the three sisters, maize, beans, and squash, revolutionized the American diet. When planted together, these crops supported each other. The corn provided a stalk for the beans to climb. The beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, and the large leaves of the squash protected the earth from drying out. This symbiotic relationship allowed for the creation of permanent villages and the storage of massive surpluses, leading to a population boom that would eventually give rise to complex civilizations. Along the mist-shrouded Pacific Northwest, a culture of wood and sea flourished. The abundance of cedar and salmon allowed for a society of unprecedented artistic and social complexity. They carved massive totem poles that served as both history books and spiritual monuments, recording the lineage of great families and the stories of the forest. Massive longhouses built from cedar planks provided shelter for entire clans against the persistent coastal rains. Here, the ocean was the primary highway, and the great whaling canoes were symbols of power and courage, connecting the coastal peoples with the deep mysteries of the northern Pacific. As societies grew more complex, their gaze turned toward the heavens. Across the continents, early Americans became expert astronomers, tracking the movements of the sun, moon, and stars with startling precision. They built stone circles and aligned their architecture with the solstices and equinoxes, integrating the cosmic cycle into their religious and agricultural lives. These celestial observations were not just for timekeeping. They were a way to understand their place in the universe. By mapping the stars, they created calendars that dictated the timing of ceremonies and the planting of crops, bridging the gap between the divine and the terrestrial. Trade networks began to stretch across thousands of miles, linking distant cultures through the exchange of rare and valuable resources. Obsidian from the volcanic peaks of the west found its way to the Atlantic coast, while seashells from the Gulf of Mexico were traded into the heart of the Great Lakes. This was a commerce of ideas as much as goods. Technologies for pottery, weapon-making, and textile weaving spread along these ancient routes. These interactions fostered a sense of interconnectedness, as different nations recognized the value of what lay beyond their own borders, creating a continental web of mutual dependence and cultural exchange. In the Mississippi and Ohio river valleys, a new monumental tradition began to take shape: the construction of massive earthworks. These mounds, some in the shape of animals and others rising as great truncated pyramids, served as the spiritual and political centers of growing chiefdoms. Labor was organized on a grand scale, as thousands of baskets of earth were moved to create these permanent marks on the landscape. These sites were more than just burial grounds. They were the foundations of the first true cities in North America, signaling a shift toward centralized power and the beginning of a new era of urban development. Deep in the heart of the Southern Highlands, a botanical revolution was quietly unfolding that would change the course of human history. The domestication of teosinte into maize was a feat of ancient genetic engineering, achieved over centuries of careful selection. As these small wild grasses evolved into robust golden ears of corn, the energetic foundation of American civilization was laid. This caloric surplus allowed populations to explode and shifted the focus of life from the uncertainty of the hunt to the predictable cycles of the harvest, anchoring wandering tribes to the soil they tended. In the arid stretches of the Southwest, survival depended on the mastery of water. These ancient engineers constructed sophisticated irrigation systems, carving miles of canals into the sun-baked earth with only stone tools and wooden digging sticks. By redirecting the flow of seasonal rivers, they transformed the desert into a lush mosaic of gardens. This control over the environment was a testament to their collective labor and foresight, proving that even in the harshest climates, ingenuity could foster abundance. The canal networks became the lifeblood of burgeoning communities, connecting distant households through a shared, precious resource. As populations grew, so did the ambition of their architecture. In places like Chaco Canyon, the ancestral Puebloans began constructing great houses, massive multi-story stone complexes that served as the civic and ceremonial hubs of the region. These were not merely dwellings, but complex astronomical markers and warehouses for trade goods. Built with precision masonry and timber hauled from distant forests, these structures rose from the canyon floor as symbols of a highly organized society. The coordination required to transport thousands of logs and shape millions of stones pointed to a centralized authority that spanned hundreds of miles. The prosperity of these great centers was always at the mercy of the climate. A period of prolonged, devastating drought began to grip the continent, testing the resilience of every society. In the face of dry wells and withered crops, the once bustling stone cities faced a slow, quiet crisis. This era of environmental stress forced a radical rethinking of social structures and spiritual beliefs. Rather than a sudden collapse, there was a strategic migration. People abandoned their ancestral homes, carrying their culture and knowledge to more reliable water sources, leaving behind silent monuments to their former grandeur. With the rise of permanent settlements came the formalization of social hierarchy. Societies were no longer composed of equal peers, but of distinct classes with specialized roles. At the top stood the elite, priests and chieftains who claimed divine lineage and controlled the distribution of surplus grain. Beneath them were the artisans, warriors, and the vast majority of commoners who worked the land. This stratification was reflected in their burials and their clothing, with the powerful adorned in rare feathers and polished stones. This transition marked the birth of the first true political states, where power was consolidated and passed through bloodlines. As conflict and competition for resources increased, the nature of hunting and warfare was revolutionized by a new technology, the bow and arrow. Replacing the ancient atlatl, this weapon offered greater range, accuracy, and stealth. It changed the dynamics of the hunt, allowing hunters to take down swifter prey from greater distances. However, it also signaled a shift in intertribal relations. Defensive palisades began to appear around villages, and the figure of the warrior became a central pillar of social identity. This innovation was a double-edged sword, providing better food security while simultaneously raising the stakes of territorial disputes. Despite the lack of a written alphabet in many regions, history was meticulously preserved through a sophisticated oral tradition. Elders acted as living archives, memorizing vast epics that detailed the origins of their people, their migrations, and their laws. These stories were not mere folklore. They were the constitutional framework of the tribe, passed down with rhythmic precision during long winter nights. Through song, dance, and storytelling, the collective memory of the Beringian crossing and the taming of the wilderness remained vivid, ensuring that each new generation understood their place in a lineage that stretched back thousands of years. In the fertile floodplains of the Mississippi, the city of Cahokia rose to become the largest urban center north of Mexico. At its peak, it was home to tens of thousands of people, a sprawling metropolis centered around the massive Monk's Mound. This earthen pyramid, larger at its base than the Great Pyramid of Giza, was the heart of a vibrant kingdom. Here, trade from the four corners of the continent converged. Cahokia was a melting pot of languages and customs, a place where the spiritual and the commercial were inextricably linked, representing the pinnacle of North American mound-building culture before its eventual decline. While inland empires rose, coastal peoples were perfecting the art of maritime travel. In the Pacific Northwest and along the Atlantic shores, master shipwrights carved massive ocean-going canoes from single cedar logs or stretched animal skins over whalebone frames. These vessels allowed for the exploitation of the rich marine ecosystems and facilitated long-distance trade along the coastlines. Navigators used their knowledge of currents, bird migrations, and the stars to traverse the dangerous waters of the open sea. These mariners linked isolated islands and coastal villages, creating a parallel world of commerce and culture that thrived on the edge of the continent. By the turn of the first millennium, the Americas were a tapestry of diverse and interconnected civilizations. From the frozen tundras of the north to the tropical jungles of the south, humans had adapted to every conceivable environment. They were farmers, astronomers, engineers, and artists. They had built cities that rivaled those of Europe and Asia and established trade networks that spanned a hemisphere. This was a continent in its prime, a world of complex politics and deep spiritualism, all stemming from those first small bands of hunters who had crossed the land bridge millennia before. The stage was set for the next great chapter of human history. In the arid canyons of the American Southwest, a new architectural marvel was taking shape. The ancestral Puebloans, master masons of the desert, began constructing multi-story great houses. Chaco Canyon became a ceremonial and economic hub, featuring massive sandstone structures like Pueblo Bonito. These buildings were not just shelters, but complex celestial calendars. using only stone tools, these builders crafted intricate masonry that has withstood the relentless desert winds for a millennium. This transition marked a shift from nomadic lifestyles to sophisticated, permanent urban planning in one of the most inhospitable climates on Earth. At the summit of Fajada Butte, the sun's rays were harnessed to track the passing of seasons with incredible accuracy. The Puebloans developed a profound understanding of the cosmos, aligning their architecture with the lunar standstills and solar solstices. Through the sun dagger and other sophisticated petroglyphs, they mapped the heavens with a precision that rivaled the great observatories of the Old World. This celestial connection guided their agricultural cycles and religious ceremonies, proving that their society was governed by the laws of the universe as much as the needs of the parched earth. To the northeast, amidst the dense hardwood forests, a revolutionary political experiment was born. 5 warring nations, the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca, found themselves locked in a cycle of endless blood feuds. According to tradition, a visionary known as the Peacemaker and his spokesman Hiawatha brought the great law of peace. They established the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the world's oldest living participatory democracy. By burying their weapons beneath the Great Tree of Peace, they created a unified front that would dominate the eastern woodlands for centuries, emphasizing consensus over individual conquest. Life within the Haudenosaunee Confederacy centered on the Longhouse, a massive structure of elm bark and saplings that could house dozens of families. These buildings were the physical manifestation of their social order, matrilineal and communal. Every person belonged to a clan, and the clan mothers held the ultimate authority in choosing and removing leaders. This sophisticated social hierarchy ensured that no single individual could seize absolute power. Within these smoky halls, stories were told, laws were debated, and a culture of mutual aid flourished, creating a resilient society that could withstand the pressures of both nature and external conflict. Across the fertile lands of the southeast and the woodlands, a fundamental shift in nutrition occurred with the perfection of the 3 sisters. Corn, beans, and squash were grown together in a symbiotic relationship that protected the soil and provided a complete protein source. Corn provided a trellis for the beans, while the beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, and the squash leaves shaded the ground to prevent moisture loss. This agricultural triad allowed for a massive population explosion. For the first time, large-scale food storage was possible, leading to the rise of specialized labor and professional classes. Long before the great cities of the Mississippi, the Hopewell culture had transformed the Ohio River Valley into a landscape of sacred geometry. They constructed vast earthen embankments in the shapes of circles, squares, and animals. The most enigmatic is the Great Serpent Mound, a winding effigy over 1,000 feet long that appears to swallow an egg. These mounds were not mere burials, but ceremonial centers where people traveled hundreds of miles to gather. The sheer scale of these earthworks suggests a highly organized society with a shared religious vision that spanned vast distances and diverse tribal groups. The influence of the South reached far into the North as trade routes expanded across the continent. Exotic goods like obsidian from the Mexican highlands and colorful macaw feathers from the tropical jungles found their way into the hands of northern elites. This exchange was not just about material wealth, but the flow of ideas. Artistic motifs, religious concepts, and agricultural techniques were shared across the landscape. Traders acted as the vital arteries of the Americas, crossing deserts and mountain ranges on foot, carrying the cultural DNA of the Maya and other southern civilizations to the banks of the Rio Grande. In the far north, the warming climate of the medieval warm period allowed the Thule people to migrate rapidly across the Arctic. Originating from coastal Alaska, they were the ancestors of the modern Inuit. They brought with them revolutionary technology: the toggling harpoon, dog sleds, and large skin boats called umiaks. These tools allowed them to hunt large whales, providing a surplus of oil and meat that supported permanent winter villages. Their movement across the top of the world was one of the fastest human expansions in history, eventually reaching Greenland and displacing the earlier, more isolated Dorset culture. In the scorching heat of the Sonoran Desert, the Hohokam people achieved a feat of hydraulic engineering that remains unparalleled in the ancient world. They excavated hundreds of miles of irrigation canals, some reaching 12 feet deep and several miles in length. Using only wooden digging sticks and baskets, they diverted water from the Gila and Salt rivers to transform the desert into a lush garden of cotton and agave. Their society was built around the management of water, with complex social rules governing its distribution. These canals were the lifeblood of their civilization, allowing thousands to thrive in a wasteland. As the second millennium dawned, the Americas were a world of incredible complexity and antiquity. From the intricate canals of the Hohokam to the democratic councils of the Haudenosaunee, the continent was a mosaic of sophisticated human achievement. These civilizations were at their zenith, having independently developed mathematics, astronomy, and complex governance. They were unaware that on the other side of the Atlantic, ships were beginning to venture further west. The stage was now set for the first encounter between two worlds that had been separated for over 10,000 years, an event that would irrevocably alter history. While civilizations flourished inland, a fleeting chapter began on the rocky shores of Newfoundland. Around the year 1000, Norse voyagers led by Leif Erikson established a small settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows. They were the first Europeans to set foot on the continent, encountering the indigenous inhabitants they called Skraelings. This meeting was marked by cultural misunderstanding and isolation. The Norse, far from their Greenland base, lacked the resources to sustain a permanent presence. Within a few decades, they abandoned their sod-walled longhouses, leaving behind only scattered iron nails as silent witnesses to their brief presence in a vast, unknown world. In the heart of the Mississippi Valley, the city of Cahokia reached its zenith, becoming the largest urban center north of Mexico. Dominated by the massive Monk's Mound, the city was a masterpiece of earthwork engineering, housing over 10,000 residents in planned neighborhoods. Its influence radiated across the southeast, driven by a shared religious ideology and a vast trade network. Merchants transported copper from the Great Lakes and marine shells from the Gulf, funneling wealth into the central plaza. Cahokia was a cosmogram, its very layout aligned with the movements of the sun and moon, reflecting a society deeply attuned to the heavens. In the arid southwest, the ancestral Puebloans faced a period of profound transition. The great ceremonial centers of Chaco Canyon were slowly abandoned as populations migrated toward the defensive security of cliff dwellings. At sites like Mesa Verde, they constructed intricate multi-story apartments directly into the sheer sandstone alcoves of canyon walls. These structures were both architectural marvels and strategic strongholds, reachable only by precarious hand and toe holds. Despite the environmental stresses of prolonged drought, their culture remained vibrant, characterized by sophisticated masonry, intricate pottery, and a spiritual life centered on the kivas, the subterranean heart of their communities. In the tropical lowlands of the Yucatan, the Maya civilization evolved into its post-classic phase. While the inland jungle cities had declined, maritime trade routes flourished along the coast. Canoes carved from giant cedars carried obsidian, salt, and cacao between thriving port cities like Tulum and Cozumel. The Maya became the master merchants of the Caribbean, navigating treacherous reefs with expert skill. Their society remained literate and mathematically advanced, with scribes continuing to record celestial cycles in bark paper codices. The resilience of the Maya ensured that their traditions and language persisted, even as the political landscape of the peninsula shifted. To the west, in the Valley of Mexico, the Mexica people fulfilled a prophecy by founding Tenochtitlan on an island in Lake Texcoco. Through ingenious engineering, they transformed a swamp into a metropolis of floating gardens and stone temples. Connected to the mainland by massive causeways, the city became the heart of the Aztec Empire. It was a place of immense wealth and strict social order, where markets bustled with goods from across Mesoamerica. At its center, the Templo Mayor rose toward the sky, a testament to their religious devotion and the military power that demanded tribute from distant provinces. High in the Andes Mountains, the Inca Empire began its rapid expansion under the visionary leader Pachacuti. They created a state of unparalleled organization, unifying disparate cultures through a vast network of stone roads and suspension bridges known as the Chapacñan. This imperial infrastructure allowed for the rapid movement of armies and information, recorded on the knotted strings of the quipu. The Inca mastered high-altitude agriculture, carving terraces into steep mountainsides to sustain a population of millions. Their empire was a marvel of vertical integration, stretching from the Pacific coast to the Amazonian fringes, all governed from the sacred capital of Cusco. In the woodlands of the northeast, 5 warring nations found a new path toward peace and unity. Through the efforts of the great peacemaker and Hiawatha, the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca formed the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. They established the Great Law of Peace, a complex system of representative democracy that emphasized consensus and collective well-being. This alliance replaced cycles of violence with a unified political structure, symbolized by the Tree of Great Peace. The power of the clan mothers to choose and advise leaders ensured a balance of authority, creating a stable and powerful league that dominated the region for generations. Along the rugged Pacific Northwest coast, a culture of abundance and artistry flourished. The people of the Cedar lived in large plank houses. Their wealth derived from the bountiful salmon runs and the resources of the temperate rainforest. They developed a complex social hierarchy expressed through the potlatch, a ceremonial feast where status was reinforced by the generous distribution of property. Their artistic tradition was world-renowned, featuring intricate carvings on totem poles that recorded lineage and mythology. In this environment of plenty, the boundary between the natural and supernatural worlds was constantly navigated through dance, song, and elaborate masks. As the 15th century drew to a close, subtle shifts began to occur along the Atlantic coastline. In the Caribbean, the Taino people lived in large, well-organized villages, unaware that the horizon held a coming storm. Strange items occasionally washed ashore, driftwood of unknown origin or fragments of iron that hinted at worlds far beyond their knowledge. There were whispers among the elders of omens in the sky and changes in the ocean currents. The balance of life, maintained for thousands of years through adaptation and tradition, was about to be challenged by an unprecedented encounter that would change the trajectory of human history forever. By 1492, the Americas were a tapestry of diverse and sophisticated societies. From the frozen Arctic to the tip of Tierra del Fuego, tens of millions of people lived in empires, confederacies, and autonomous villages. They had mapped the stars, engineered the land, and built cities that rivaled any in the Old World. It was a hemisphere of deep antiquity and vibrant innovation, separate yet parallel to the developments in Europe, Africa, and Asia. As three small ships from Spain crossed the mid-Atlantic, the stage was set for the collision of two worlds, an event that would bring both tragedy and a new global era. In the early morning mist of October 1492, the Taino people of Guanahani observed three strange winged mountains emerging from the horizon. These were not the dugout canoes common to the islands, but massive structures of wood and canvas that defied their understanding of seafaring. The elders watched from the palm-fringed shore, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and deep ancestral caution. As the vessels dropped anchor, the quiet rhythm of the Caribbean morning was replaced by the rhythmic clanking of iron and the splash of landing boats, signaling the abrupt end of an era of isolation. The initial meeting on the sand was a study in profound contrast. The Spanish sailors, draped in heavy wool and glinting steel, stepped into a world of heat, vibrant greenery, and naked grace. They offered glass beads and hawksbells, trinkets that the Taino received with hospitality, unaware that these visitors viewed the land as a prize to be claimed for a distant crown. Communication was a frantic dance of gestures and misinterpreted words. While the Taino shared their food and knowledge of the currents, the newcomers looked past the people, searching the earth for the yellow glint of gold. Word of the men from the sky rippled through the Caribbean archipelago with the speed of a tropical storm. From the Greater Antilles to the smaller Leeward Islands, runners and canoeists carried news of the pale strangers and their thundersticks. The sophisticated trade networks that had linked these islands for centuries became conduits for warnings. In the great plazas of the Taino chiefdoms, the caciques gathered to debate the meaning of these arrivals. Were they returned spirits from the ancient myths, or a terrestrial threat that required a unified defense? The balance of power was shifting before a single map could be drawn. By the time the Spanish reached the larger islands of Hispaniola and Cuba, the scale of their ambition became clear. They built fortified settlements, their architecture a jarring intrusion of stone and mortar amidst the thatched bohíos of the natives. The European concept of land ownership, a concept alien to the communal structures of the Americas, began to carve up the landscape. Ancient groves were cleared for timber, and the quiet sounds of the forest were replaced by the ring of axes and the lowing of imported cattle. The indigenous people found themselves forced into a new, harsh reality of labor and subjugation. Unseen and deadlier than any blade, a silent killer accompanied the newcomers. Microscopic invaders, smallpox, measles, and influenza, to which the inhabitants of the Americas had no immunity, began to ravage the populations. In the crowded villages, where life had once been a vibrant cycle of song and ceremony, a heavy silence descended. The elders, the keepers of oral history and medicine, were often the first to fall, leaving the youth without their guides. This biological catastrophe would do more to destabilize the great civilizations of the West than any army ever could, tilting the scales of the coming conflict. To the west, across the Gulf, the Mexica Empire, popularly known as the Aztecs, received reports of floating houses on the coast. In the magnificent highland capital of Tenochtitlan, Emperor Montezuma II consulted his astronomers and priests. The omens were unsettling. a pillar of fire in the night sky, and the sighting of strange beings on the eastern shore. These reports described men with hair on their faces and beasts that looked like giant deer but carried riders. The Mexica, masters of central Mexico, watched with a mixture of religious awe and strategic concern as the strangers began their march toward the heart of the empire. The march of Hernán Cortés toward the Aztec capital was not a solitary journey. He exploited the fractures within the empire, forging alliances with cities like Tlaxcala that had long resisted Mexican dominance. The landscape changed as the expedition climbed from the humid lowlands into the thin air of the volcanic mountains. Here, the Spaniards saw the true scale of the world they had discovered. They passed through massive markets and irrigation systems that exceeded anything in Spain. The encounter was no longer between explorers and islanders, but between two militarized and sophisticated imperial powers destined for a violent collision. When the Europeans finally crested the mountains and looked down into the Valley of Mexico, they were stunned into silence. Before them lay Tenochtitlan, a city of white stone and brilliant colors shimmering in the center of Lake Texcoco. Its causeways were crowded with thousands of people, and its pyramids rose like mountains toward the heavens. It was a city of nearly 200,000 residents, larger and cleaner than London or Paris at the time. To the Spaniards, it seemed like a dream of enchantment from a romance novel, a testament to the engineering and social complexity of the people of the sun. The first meeting between Montezuma and Cortés on the Great Southern Causeway was a moment of unprecedented gravity. Two worlds, separated by millennia of independent development, finally stood face to face. The emperor arrived on a litter covered in quetzal feathers and gold, while the Spaniard sat atop his horse, the clank of his armor a rhythmic counterpoint to the soft sound of sandals. They exchanged gifts and pleasantries, but the air was thick with tension. Each leader sought to understand the other's power, unaware that this brief moment of diplomacy was the prologue to the total transformation of the American continent. As the 16th century progressed, the map of the world was rewritten in blood and ink. The collapse of the Aztec and later the Inca empires signaled a shift from discovery to colonization. The ancient trade routes that had once carried jade, turquoise, and feathers were repurposed to move silver and gold toward the Atlantic. The diverse cultures that had thrived for over 15,000 years, from the descendants of the first Beringia crossings to the complex societies of the Mississippi, now faced a globalized world. The isolation of the Americas had ended, giving way to a new, shared, and often tragic human history. Beyond the clash of empires, a quiet revolution occurred in the soil. European wheat and grapes met American maize and potatoes. This biological exchange, often called the Columbian Exchange, fundamentally altered the diet of the entire planet. While the empires fell, the crops developed by ancient American farmers over millennia, tomatoes, peppers, and chocolate, crossed the oceans to redefine global cuisine. In the Americas, the introduction of invasive species and new livestock reshaped the physical landscape. This was not merely a change of kings, but a total ecological fusion that tethered the two hemispheres together forever through the humble medium of food. Far to the north, the arrival of the horse, a creature that had actually evolved in the Americas before going extinct there thousands of years earlier, returned to the Great Plains. The Plains cultures, descendants of those who once hunted mammoths on foot, underwent a rapid transformation. The horse provided a new mobility, allowing tribes to hunt buffalo with unprecedented efficiency and defend their territories with renewed vigor. The landscape of the central continent became a theater of high-speed movement, blending ancient tracking skills with a newfound equestrian mastery that would define their resistance and lifestyle for several centuries to come. Amidst the chaos of colonization, the memory of the first journey was never truly lost. Across the continent, oral traditions served as a living archive, preserved through generations of storytelling. Elders sat by flickering fires, recounting tales of a time when the world was made of ice, and the great spirits led the people across a bridge of land. These stories were not just myths. They were geographical and historical records encoded in metaphor. While Western science was centuries away from proving the existence of Beringia, the descendants of the first pioneers already held the map of their origins in their collective memory. As the 19th century dawned, a new kind of explorer emerged: the archaeologist. No longer seeking gold, these scholars began to dig into the earth to find the physical remnants of the first Americans. In caves and riverbeds, they uncovered stone tools and fluted points that didn't match anything found in Europe. These artifacts were the silent witnesses to a history that preceded the written word. The discovery of ancient campsites beneath layers of sediment began to challenge the prevailing Eurocentric view of history, suggesting a human presence in the Americas that was far older and more sophisticated than previously imagined by the Western world. For decades, the Clovis first theory dominated the scientific landscape, suggesting that a single group of hunters had crossed the ice-free corridor approximately 13,000 years ago. These Clovis people, identified by their distinctively shaped spearheads, were thought to be the original ancestors of all indigenous Americans. However, as more sites were excavated from Oregon to Chile, evidence began to surface that didn't fit the timeline. Pre-clovis sites suggested that humans had arrived much earlier, perhaps using different routes. The narrative of the first discovery was becoming more complex, revealing a tapestry of multiple migrations rather than a single isolated event. Scientists began to look toward the sea, theorizing a Kelp Highway along the Pacific coast. Instead of a grueling trek through frozen interior valleys, these early mariners likely followed the coastline in skin-covered boats, sustained by the rich marine life of the kelp forests. This maritime route would have allowed for much faster movement southward, explaining how human populations reached the tip of South America so rapidly. Submerged beneath the rising tides of the post-Ice Age world, these coastal camps remain one of archaeology's greatest mysteries, hidden under hundreds of feet of dark, cold water and shifting silt. In the modern era, the secrets of the Beringia crossing moved from the shovel to the laboratory. Advances in genetic sequencing allowed researchers to trace the DNA of modern indigenous populations back to a small group of ancestors who lived in isolation on the land bridge for thousands of years. This Beringian standstill hypothesis suggests that the unique genetic markers of Native Americans developed while they were paused between two worlds, waiting for the ice to retreat. The blood flowing through millions of people today carries the biological signature of that ancient frozen bridge, proving a direct and unbroken connection to the Ice Age. The landscape itself continues to tell the story of the Great Migration. In the Arctic, melting permafrost and receding glaciers are revealing the perfectly preserved remains of the megafauna that the first Americans once hunted. Mammoths, steppe bisons, and ancient wolves emerge from the ice, their soft tissues intact after millennia. These frozen relics serve as a stark reminder of the fragile climate that allowed the land bridge to exist. As the modern world faces its own period of rapid climatic shift, the history of Beringia offers a lesson in human resilience and the profound impact of environmental change on our species' survival. Today, The descendants of those first pioneers are reclaiming their narrative. In tribal centers and universities, indigenous scholars are integrating traditional knowledge with scientific data to tell a more complete story of their arrival. Festivals and ceremonies honor the ancestors who braved the unknown, crossing the horizon into a wilderness that would become their home. This reclamation is not just about the past. It is a declaration of sovereignty and presence. The journey that began in the wind-swept tundras of Beringia continues through the vibrant, resilient cultures that maintain their connection to the land and their history through song and science. Looking back across the vast expanse of 15,000 years, the story of the Bering Land Bridge is the story of humanity's greatest odyssey. It began with a few small bands of hunters following the tracks of giants and ended with the birth of civilizations that rivaled any in the Old World. The discovery of America was not a single moment in 1492, but a slow, epic realization of a continent's potential. From the first footprint in the mud of the land bridge to the sprawling cities of today, the legacy of those first explorers remains etched into the very soul of the American continent. The Bering Land Bridge was never just a physical path of silt and tundra. It was a bridge of knowledge, a conduit through which ideas, languages, and spiritual beliefs flowed like a slow-moving river. As the tribes branched out across the vast new continent, they didn't just carry spears and hides. They carried the collective memory of a shared origin. This invisible bridge remains today, linking the disparate cultures of the Americas back to a single frozen horizon. It is the common thread in the tapestry of a continent, weaving together the destinies of those who would build empires and those who would preserve the wild. Thousands of miles south of the Bering Strait, the echoes of the first crossing were felt in the shadows of the Andes and the heat of the Amazon. The migration was a marathon spanning generations, where every new valley discovered was a promise kept to the ancestors. These pioneers transformed from tundra hunters into master architects, botanists, and astronomers. The diversity of the Americas, from the adobe pueblos of the Southwest to the stone pyramids of the Yucatan, all stems from that singular, courageous decision to walk toward the rising sun in a land where no human had ever set foot. To survive such a vast array of biomes, the descendants of the Beringians became the world's most versatile innovators. They adapted the Clovis point into specialized tools for every environment, from harvesting marine life in the Pacific Northwest to tracking game through the dense Appalachian forests. This technological evolution was born of necessity, but fueled by a profound understanding of the natural world. Each flint-knapped blade and woven basket tells a story of an intimate dialogue between the people and the land. A dialogue that began on the wind-swept plains of Beringia and continues through modern craftsmanship. While the physical bridge was reclaimed by the sea, the story of the crossing lived on in the breath of the elders. Around countless fires, the memory of the land of the long winter and the great ice wall was passed from parent to child. These oral traditions, once dismissed by Western science, are now recognized as remarkably accurate historical records. They preserve the sensory details of the migration, the sound of the calving glaciers, the taste of the salt spray, and the sight of the megafauna. Storytelling became the vessel that carried the history of Beringia across the millennia. Modern genomics has provided the map to match the legends. By studying the DNA of ancient remains and contemporary populations, scientists have traced a clear genetic lineage back to that small, isolated group in Beringia. This biological evidence acts as a bridge through time, proving that the first Americans were not merely nomads wandering by chance. but a distinct population that thrived in isolation before expanding. The data confirms what the stories always claimed, that these people were the architects of their own destiny, possessing a unique genetic signature that is the bedrock of Western Hemisphere history. Beneath the churning waters of the Bering Sea lies a lost world, a vast archaeological site hidden by the waves. This submerged landscape, once a bustling corridor of life, now guards its secrets in the dark. Marine archaeologists use sonar and underwater excavations to glimpse the hearths and campsites of the first Americans. Each artifact recovered from the seafloor is a piece of a puzzle that refines our understanding of the migration. The Bering Land Bridge is not gone. It is merely resting, a sunken monument to the endurance of those who first dared to cross it. The timeline of the Bering migration challenges our perception of history. It reminds us that the human story in the Americas is not a recent chapter, but a saga that encompasses nearly half of our species' existence outside of Africa. This deep time perspective humbles our modern achievements, grounding us in a history that saw the rise and fall of glaciers and the extinction of giants. The Bering Land Bridge taught humanity that time is not a line, but a cycle of change, where every ending, like the submerging of a land bridge, is the catalyst for a new beginning. The legacy of Beringia is most visible in the profound respect for the environment held by indigenous cultures. Having witnessed the dramatic transformation of their world, from ice-locked plains to lush forests, they understood the fragility of the balance between man and nature. This ancient wisdom, forged in the crucible of the Bering migration, offers a vital perspective on modern ecological crises. The first Americans learned to live with the land, not just on it, a philosophy that allowed them to flourish for 15,000 years. Their history is a blueprint for survival in a changing world. As we stand on the shores of the modern world, looking back toward the Bering Strait, we see more than just a geographic point. We see the origin of an American spirit defined by exploration and the courage to face the unknown. The horizon that beckoned the first hunters still exists today, driving the descendants of those pioneers to explore new frontiers in science, art, and society. The Bering Land Bridge was the first threshold, the initial gateway that proved humanity's ability to cross any barrier and adapt to any challenge, no matter how daunting the landscape. The story of the Bering Land Bridge is ultimately the story of us. It is a testament to the restlessness of the human spirit and our innate drive to see what lies over the next hill. From the first footprint on the mudflats to the modern metropolis, the journey continues. We are all travelers on a bridge between the past and the future, carrying the legacy of those who walked before us. The footprints of the first Americans are not just in the mud, they are in our blood, our history, and our shared human destiny. The bridge remains open,